was talking to Kyle about researching and stuff before podcast conversation, and he enlightened me that no one will have more information than God, and if you can, and so if you
Yeah.
can channel your own internal truth through doing things like we're doing with like breath work and acro and meditation and all that stuff, I think that the questions can naturally come. And I think it's an interesting thing what we just got to do, because before coming up here, I was like, I don't know, I was like tired and all this
Yeah.
stuff going on and whatnot. And then we do that, and I'm like,
You're in
Aubrey,
it.
what's up, man?
Yeah, man.
How are you?
I don't think that applies for any podcasters out there. I don't think that applies
I'm not
to
saying
all
you become
podcasts.
God if you
I
do
think
acro.
sometimes you need to read the book that they wrote. Like sometimes, like it was probably helpful that I read your book before we did our podcast together.
That's a good point.
Uh,
I gotta watch out. Where's the I gotta watch out what I say on here. What was this vision you had recently?
Well, yeah, man. So I know this is something that both of us have started to explore, which is ketamine-assisted meditation.
Oh.
So my first experience with ketamine, obviously I've struggled with my own bouts of depression off and on. So it was particularly interesting for me because now ketamine is approved, which is really, it used to be off-label, but now it's kind of still in this quasi off-label but approved scenario for the treatment of depression. And that's why a lot of ketamine clinics have opened up. And so my doctor came out and administered it intramuscularly. And it was like clinical type of setting. And the music, I didn't know what the fuck music to play. So I was just playing some random shit. And it was a terrible experience, like a terrible experience. I say terrible. It was just not pleasant. It wasn't like my consciousness went to the corner of my eye mask and just remained there for an hour. And it was like, it was just really, I was like, when is this going to be over? So I kind of like discarded it as something that was valuable, nor did I feel any kind of psychological benefits. But then re-engaging with it in a form where I'm able to actually meter the dose myself, and then through the nasal spray, and then layering it with meditation, that's been something that we started to explore first with Joe Dispenza's meditations. Super powerful. And now I'm like really fired up about it. And, we've obviously done that together. And I did one yesterday playing with different meditations, and it's becoming one of my favorite tools to actually like open up into the like potentiality of who we really are, and like get downloads and visions and interesting things that happen from like the deepest meditation you can imagine. And so I was telling you, I'm working on these ketamine-assisted meditation playlists, and I let a test run go yesterday, and it had a Dispenza meditation on there as a guided meditation, and it had a couple other things. I think one of the East Forest Ram Dass tracks, and I think it was during the East Forest Ram Dass I Am Loving Awareness track that I had this crazy vision of just taking a seat at this table, really long table with all these like Hindu style deities with like all of their armor, and it felt like they had like even like the tattoos on their hands, and like everything was just like covered in like the most like ornate armor tattoos, and everybody was just totally chill at this table. And it was just like a really cool experience, just feeling completely expanded, completely like full of as much love as I can feel. And just in this, I like doing it in bed, and like you were worried I was going to fall asleep when we did it, but I like being like completely cocooned, like completely comfortable, completely safe in this just like cocooned environment with like the right music, and then just into the void, into the blackness of all potentiality. And then sometimes visions come, and that was like one of those just visions that'll just stick with me, is just being at the long table with all the Hindu deity. Well, they looked Hindu. Who the fuck knows? I didn't ask them. It wasn't a dialogue.
Yeah. Do you ever get meaningful information of any of the roots of that, like reoccurring bouts of depression stuff?
Yeah. I think depression, the signature of depression is a sense of hopelessness. It's a feeling like somehow I'll get it in my head that nothing I do matters, or that I'm stuck and that I can't do anything. So it's like it's a sense of disempowerment and hopelessness. And it comes from obviously within my own, I think, desire for external validation probably is the driving factor in it. And when the validation isn't coming, I feel like I'm not worthy of my own love. I'm not worthy of the world's love. And then the depression really hits when I feel like I can't change it. Like it'll never change. You know, like no matter what I do, it's not going to be enough, no matter. It's like, because if you feel like you have a plan, then you can start to fight. You can be uncomfortable, but you can like, oh, I'm going to go start doing something, and you can like work your way out of it. But when I'm in those bouts of depression, like I just don't want to do anything. I feel like nothing I do matters. I feel like even if I cold plunge or work out or, you know, do anything, it's not going to matter. I think the thing I'm doing now that's buffered me from that is like actually having a self-love practice that I can go back to. So that I got from Kamal Ravikant's book, Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It. And that book is fucking phenomenal, because that's something that really I think is the safe harbor from a lot of these negative emotions, from depression, anxiety, a lot of these different things, is actually loving yourself on an unconditional basis, where you're not loving yourself dependent on what girls like you or what you accomplish or what you do out in the world. You just love yourself, full stop, period. That's Paul Selig would say.
Yeah. It's almost like we're like, what's it called when you're attached twins, at Siamese twins? Is that some type of slur? Am I not allowed to say that?
What's that? Conjoined, I think.
Conjoined, right? I feel like we're like conjoined twins with ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you're with yourself throughout the rest of your life. And we have all of these various opportunities to disassociate and disconnect and drink alcohol and kind of temporarily identify ourselves with our things and whatnot, and just kind of push ourselves away from actually having that heart-to-heart with your conjoined twin that is you. Mm-hmm. You know, and I wonder if like, I feel like the sooner a person can get real with meeting their twin, the easier everything becomes.
Yeah, it's interesting, because the self is definitely a multiplicity. And I think like it's very hard to draw hard boundaries. Like you can say, all right, here's the ego, the identity, here's the body, here's the soul. And in there, loosely, you can talk about those, or your higher knowing, or your consciousness, whatever language you want to use. And I think it's useful to kind of group them, but they all are kind of somewhat intermingled. You know, like when you're hungry, your body sends thoughts to your mind. And like, so your body and your mind are always working, and then your mind sends thoughts back to the body depending on what emotions it triggers, then what hormones get released, and then what epigenetic switches get turned off or on. Like your mind's controlling your body's controlling your mind, and then your soul is observing and interacting with both in an interesting way. So it's like this really weird, not weird, but really beautiful, honestly, like blended scenario. But until you kind of understand the totality of yourself, it's super hard to navigate.
What do you think about the value of one's relationship with their parents in relation to the relationship with themselves? Is that like a big deal?
I think it has become that, because I think part of I don't think we were meant to, I shouldn't say meant to, but I don't think our species kind of was oriented towards this kind of dyad relationship, this monogamous dyad, where you just had one mom and one dad. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on what should be an archetype. And the archetype is dad. The archetype is mom. And I think in a tribal setting, dad was like all of the people of the dad range, like all of the actual uncles and other people that you could just kind of cruise around and learn from a lot of people. And I think for us, even in these monogamous dyads, or, you know, my parents split up when I was 2, so I had 2 sets, so I had 2 dads. And there was definitely dad stuff with both dads, you know, just because they split when I was 2. So dad was like split in 2. And then as soon as I had some other people, maybe my Uncle Craig, or they had like a little sliver of dad role, or like some other people would have a sliver of dad, you know. And then, but I think that's actually good to diversify the archetype, you know, because I was super fortunate on the mom side. Like mom fucking just knocked it out of the park. She's like one of the most beautiful humans I've ever met in all of my wandering all around the world. And I don't say that from a biased perspective. I think it's an objective truth. Like, she's just fucking rad. So I get super lucky there. Challenges on the dad's side for sure. But either way, like, it's much more sensible to diversify that archetype into a greater range of people. And I think a lot of the problem that we have is that we got, a dad and a mom, and we think about it as the person, and they're just people. It's so much pressure to put on a person.
Yeah.
It'd be better if we just kind of like spread that out.
Yeah, there's a researcher called James Prescott that you might have heard of, and he studied various different tribal cultures and cultures in general, and observed the amount of physical contact that kids have growing up, and then also their openness with sexual expression. And what he found was that the cultures that were totally open with sexual expression among youth and were touched a lot, they would end up warring less. There was like less to fight about. They're like, it's all good. Like, we're good. There's not, you can have it. Like, that's fine. But at some point, there's this, I mean, I think that sexual repression is such a big thing. Huge. And then perhaps the touch with that is like not being loved. I think touch is one of the real easiest, most meaningful ways to convey to someone that you care about them and they're a part of the tribe and they're in. Like, I'm literally bringing you in. So the combination of sexual repression, along with not feeling accepted and connected, I think it sets the stage for a person to want to conquer.
Yeah, I mean, that makes some sense to me. Have you ever pondered the idea, because I have a little bit, but pondered why it is so horrifying for children to think about their parents having sex, or parents to think about their children having sex, or like thinking about, and it's very interesting because it's such a natural thing. And in a tribal setting, you would for sure, walk in on your parents having sex, right? Like, and it wouldn't be a big fucking deal. But
I got a child boner from my parents having sex. I think that was like my first child boner. I'm serious. I didn't even know what they were doing. I just heard like noises. I was like, oh God, what is this?
Well, that's what I think it is. I think the horror comes from the fact that it actually is somewhat of an appealing thing to see and observe, but it's your parents. So like, you're told that that's like the worst thing that you could possibly do. Yeah. So you like pile so much shame on something that should be like, oh, wow, okay. But instead you pile and just hammer in a bunch of shame, and then it becomes this bigger fucking deal where people freak out when their parents are having sex. Oh, fucking gross. Yeah. And then parents the same way with their kids. Like, I could never imagine my daughter having sex. Like, what do you mean, man? Yeah. It's a very weird thing. Like, there's a lot of interesting dynamics with sexuality and family. I mean, obviously, and just knowing how many people get abused and stuff too. That's a whole other topic, right? And I don't even want to get into that because I don't really understand that well. But just the pure shame alone of just, my parents have sex, or like, my kids have sex. Like, I don't think that should be such a big fucking deal.
You've become somewhat of a sex shame release aficionado.
I think you might be better.
Actually. I don't know about that. How do you feel like, how does one begin recognizing that perhaps they do harbor shame, and then from that, it wouldn't necessarily need to be sex, but how does one assess that with themselves, and then from there, how do they navigate kind of coming into more relationship with that, in your opinion?
Well, I think that, you really have to, it's complicated because it can come from a variety of different things. I think there's societal narratives about what's, that are gender specific, which I think are getting unwound by good scientific data, by like Wednesday Martin, who wrote the book Untrue, by Chris Ryan, by different, people who are actually looking at research in the aggregate showing that women are as interested in sex and desiring to be sexually active and actually have, from a statistical standpoint, a more difficult time keeping the passion in a monogamous dyad than men do, if you actually look at the charts, right? So like there's all these stigmas about it. And I think these stigmas come from fear, and then the stigmas get internalized by different people for different reasons. And that could be men being bisexual or homosexual. It could be women just being, open to having a variety of sexual experiences and then being slut shamed or whatever that is. Like, there's so many different sources that could come from early on, where parents, like, as soon as a kid figures out that it's pleasurable to touch their genitals, parents like freak out and like, don't do that, you're grounded. And the kid's like, this thing feels good in my body. And they're like, no, that's the bad thing. Like, that's weird. And then, so that could compound some shame. And then there's all the whole performance element of things, which then, I got super caught up in. Like, if I wasn't performing, like, the same thing that I applied to my basketball, like, I had to get out there and like crush it on the basketball court, or else I was like despondent. I felt like I was unworthy of love. I felt like a loser. I felt like a total piece of shit. Well, it was like just like that with every time I would have sex. So I would go into every time I would have sex with mad anxiety, and then huge relief when it was over and went well. It wasn't even that. I was upset, like in some ways, like obsessed with the chase of that and the thrill of that experience. But nonetheless, was it ultimately enjoyable? Not nearly as much as it could be, because I was completely anxious the whole way leading up.
Yeah, well, you're essentially having sex with yourself.
Yeah, I'm just looking
like
back at myself.
The girl's
How am I doing?
like, she's there.
She's like the hoop. She's like the hoop, and I'm the basket.
This is about me right now.
Yeah.
Step aside.
and she's the one that's just measuring. So it's like she's the Olympic judge, and I'm the one performing, and then I'm like watching her to see how I do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's a big thing that I think a lot of people get trapped in, and it's not gender specific. I think both sides can get trapped in that. And then like shame about smells, like shame about like, let's put deodorant. I was like, I'm not into deodorants. I'm not into like any just smell like a human, like smell like you're supposed to smell. Like yeah, shower and stuff, but you don't need to use a bunch of perfumed nonsense. Like humans smell good if they're healthy. Yep. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's just like layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of it. And I think you got to just kind of peel back all of that stuff and get to the root of what it is, which is just a beautiful thing.
As we're thinking about having sex with yourself while the other person's in the room, I think we do that a lot with relationships in general. So we're so focused on ourselves, and there's a bunch of people that are in their own tornado of somebodyness. And it's just a bunch of tornadoes spinning around, knocking shit over inside of a room. And I'm like, oh, yeah, it's kind of, I wonder if somehow that could be healed through sexuality, or if sexuality could be healed through deeper connection in general in any relationship. But it feels like there's like, how you have sex is probably how you relate to people in the world. I don't know.
Yeah, I think sex should be a practice of presence and connection. Like, you should be able to surrender your mind and just join. It should be union, like actual union with another person, I think, when it's best. And that doesn't preclude any type of sex. Like, you can be joined in some kinky sex, you can be in union in some tantric, like very spiritual, non-genitally focused sexual activities, like intimacy acts. We can span the whole range, but ideally you get out of the way of your own head and you're just connected with somebody. I mean, you're one of the best body workers I've ever encountered, and I'm sure that when you're doing it, you're just kind of listening and just connected. You're not like thinking about a bunch of stuff like, oh, I bet if I stretch Aubrey's wrist out, he's gonna fucking like it, and then he'll want me to do that more. If you're thinking that, you're probably it's going to be shitty.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You're just kind of like, all right, what's going on in the body here? And I think it's just surrendering the mind and then connecting in that way. And I think that's something that we need to like start talking about and like reminding people, because right now sex ed is just fucking Pornhub. That's it.
So what do we talk about? What is the reminder? And how do people actionably begin that process, in your opinion?
Well, it's weird because the people who would actually have the knowledge base to talk about it are like parental level people. And like no kid wants to talk to parental level aged people about sex. And it's like super awkward. Like it's an idea that even talking about it with your parents is like disgusting and awkward and like, so it's this whole thing, like, where are you going to get information from your fucking, homie Ronnie? Like, he's going to be talking to you about like the potentiality of union and sexuality and the release of your performance anxiety and you're connecting to another person and like, no, like, so I think really podcasts and like the ways that people are going to download media from like abstract non-parental people. But I think as new generations start to have kids and like don't teach them the shame around it and like just approach it in a way, because if you approach something with fear, that fear is going to transfer. Somebody else is going to get like, oh, whoa, you know? And I think the more apprehension that people have about it, the more that it creates that same response. And also if there's, you know, any kind of like pathological like enjoyment of it, then that's going to also create fear as well. So you got to just be really fucking chill and neutral and just talk about it as like one of the things that happens, like breathing.
Yeah.
Like if you have a kid, like talk to them about breathing. Like here's what you can do with your breath. Deep breaths calm you down. If you're breathing shallow, try and, you know, do this. This is what you can do if you breathe a lot. How does that feel? You know, like all of these things like breath. And then like sex. Here's another thing. This is a natural human thing that's going to happen. Like here's kind of some basic fucking groundwork, and then go explore. Here's some recommended boundaries, you know, things to keep in mind. Here's some lessons from, you know, ways that we've fucked it up before.
I wonder are there any standout lessons that you've learned throughout your various sexual episodes in your reality? I feel like you're like my authority. I'm like, if there's like a thing, I'm like, I think I should call Aubrey. I think he's gonna know what to do.
Well, I mean, I had to prove to myself that I was, you know, I had high sexual prowess. Like that was a necessity, because that's what made a man, and being a man was, you know, what made me worthy of being loved by myself. You know, and I learned that. So you got to be a man, and to be a real man, you got to be like, you know, a sexual behemoth. You got to be a beast in bed, you know? So I was on a quest to prove that to myself for a long, long time. And, you know, it took actually getting in the open relationship where until I actually was able to start to unravel that and see how that was a, you know, a quest. That was the classic hungry ghost. Like I could never quite prove it. But I started to learn some lessons, you know, like, you know, I had a lot of, you know, threesomes and different things, especially when I was in my late 20s and early 30s. And those are really actually more about, you know, it's rare that everybody is going to be super connected in that. So, and you got a lot of things to think about, especially when people are like, you know, so it's rare that actually is a fun experience to actually be in. It's fun for the ego. The ego loves it. Like, oh, look at me. I'm able to do this. But I think one of the lessons is that the best sex is not about how many people you're doing it with or like who they are or what's going on. It's like, can you fully release and surrender into the present moment? Can you let it all go? And I mean, that's fucking real hard to do in a threesome or in a group setting, because there's so many other factors, you know, and especially like if there's another, I haven't done this often, but if there's another guy in the room, you know, and then you're having sex with your girl and he's having sex with his girl or whatever, like then there's like the other, like you want to like look good in front of your homies too, you know. So it's not just the girls, it's like not competition necessarily, but it's like a whole other dynamic. So it just adds layers of thought into the head. And so those experiences, I tend to now go away from those experiences rather than towards them, because I know that it's just going to put me in my head a little bit more. It's going to be more resistance to actually surrendering to the union of the experience. So it's been an interesting journey, because it went, you know, I was pursuing that, and that was like something I was like really wanted as I was trying to prove myself. But then when I get down to the actuality of it, what I really want is to be completely in the place of no mind. And that's where the good shit happens.
I found in my the little bit of exploration, going to like sex parties and just multiple partners and whatnot. I found sex parties in particular, though, and yeah, both. It's interesting when you change the rules and regulations of a room. As long as everyone's on the same page, everything is normal. You know,
Yeah.
there's like this belief system like, nope, this is just it's the way God intended it.
Yeah.
You're like, well, you haven't been to a party in, my buddy's place in Pacific Palisades. Because God had different intentions apparently. It's fascinating how we have these different how our belief systems kind of contain us. We're like living inside this mold of our
Sure.
belief system. That the opportunity, it doesn't need to be a sex party or like some big sexual bacchanal thing, but the opportunity, like Joseph Campbell, detribalization. Like what you conceive to be as normal, you're in that, and then to break out of that feels almost like a sin. And then you go into another place where it's safe. We're all playing by these new rules, and you're like, oh, this is actually quite normal. Is that something have you experienced that at all?
Well, for sure. I mean, I think the idea of pretty much what you come to understand is that everything is normal if you believe it's normal, as long as it's not like the only area where there's actually a line is, are you doing something in a predatory way? Are you doing something that's taking advantage of somebody? Are you pressuring somebody to do something they don't want to do? That's where that's where there's the hard boundary, right? Like if there's true full consent, then what the fuck are we worried about? Like it's only when you're creating situations where you're putting people under pressure, or you're putting people in situations where they're doing things they don't want to do, or doing things that are harmful to them. That's where the only boundary should lie. But everything else should be like, yeah, fucking check it out. Like figure it out. Like honestly, man, like I think for men, there's so much bound up into homophobia. Like there's so much bound up into homophobia. And, I'm quite confident that I'm not attracted to men, but I know that there's lingering homophobia. So like, I do think that I should make out with a dude, like full on French kiss make
This
out
could
with
be the
dude.
podcast.
No, it's not happening now.
All right, well,
I'm rejecting that application. This is like for the future, man. I gotta
edit that out.
I'm still
not good with rejection.
but really though, man, like I feel like what the fuck? Like, that's something that it shouldn't matter to me.
Yeah.
But it still matters. And if it still matters, like I should like at least dispel some of that shame that I have around that, or whatever the fuck that is. Like, okay, like who cares? Even if I don't like it. Like I talked about this on a podcast I did with Ellis, but I was having like prostate issues, and one of the ways to help the prostate is to actually milk the prostate, like put pressure on it. And so I had a doctor do it first, but it's really annoying to go to the doctor's office and like he sticks his finger in your ass and like pushes down on it, and then you pee, and then whatever the stuff that was causing the inflammation in my prostate came out. And I was like, fuck it. So I just got one of the Enjoy wands. It's like curved wands, and I do it myself. Now, granted, it's not a sexual situation, so I have not found any pleasure from doing it.
I recommend it.
I hear it's great, and I've heard a lot of people who say that it's pleasurable, but it hasn't been pleasurable yet for me. But again, it's not a sexual situation. I'm like wanding my butt and like pushing down. I'm like pushing down on my prostate just to like squeeze that little fuzzy golf ball so I can get the stuff out, so it feels better. It's like I'm doing it. It's like I'm rolling out on a lacrosse ball or something like that. Like it's myofascial release, but it's with my prostate. It's in my butt. But the thing is like after I started doing that, I noticed like a sense of like liberation, like because I would never put anything in my butt, but now that I like put it in there and I'm digging around and pushing down on different parts, I'm like, all right, well, that closed door is at least open to me now, and like maybe I'll enjoy it, what's in there, but at least for now it's open, and like I'm not any different. Like it's like it's all good, like that thing that I kind of like had tension around is like, all right, whatever.
It's funny how we isolate these things that would just completely naturally happen if we're living like a cool, liberated, natural-ish lifestyle, into like, okay, I'm going to go to the doctor's office to do this thing that I can actually have a really great time with my sexual partner at home. But instead of like, I get in my car and I'm under these these bright lights in an air-conditioned room, and he's got a glove, and it's like, okay, we're doing it.
He's not enjoying it. He's like, oh God, I got to fucking
what
stick
are
my
we
finger in
doing
this
here?
guy's ass. Yeah.
And when you are sexually stimulated, it actually engorges blood back into the prostate as well. So it actually becomes like bigger. So that's the time.
So yeah, it's like it's moving. It was funny. I talked about that on the podcast, and I had a bunch of people reach out like, yo, I've been having like chronic prostatitis issues too. And these are all people who are, super opposed to having stuff in their butt like I was.
Yeah.
And I think it's just ignoring that, just like you're the movement guy, like you understand, like your body heals through movement, like through motion, through fluidity, through like loosening up all of the different joints and all of the different fascia and all the different pushing on all the different organs. Right before we did this, you had your feet, we were doing acro, you had your feet up there in my psoas and pushing on different things. And the other day we were doing body work and you're digging your fingers into my liver area, right? And like deep stuff released in there. Like that's how we like heal in a big way. And I think there's like healing in the asshole too. There's like healing available everywhere.
Yeah. Well, I think the asshole and genitals and all these different places, particularly, they freeze up. I think there's an instance of shame manifests itself, however it does. And then there's this, everything contracts and shortens. And then instead of working that through, we just stuff it in and go on to the next task. And then you can get by with that for a while, but it just piles up and piles up like a dam. And then the statistic on men that get prostate cancer at some point in their life is like, and it's like ridiculous. It's like, I think it's like supposed to be 100%. Like if you live old enough, you'll get some cancer in that thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what are we? No. Like we just need, if there is darkness in yourself, your task is to remove, this is an Andrew Still quote, founder of osteopathy. Your task is to remove the obstruction. Here's a Rumi quote. Your task isn't to find love. It's to same thing, like remove the obstacles to love. So that if we can focus on that, I think we're really getting somewhere. But instead, we end up just continuing to build this apparatus around the original thorn. That's a reference from Michael Singer's Untethered Soul. We have that initial wound, and then from there, as opposed to addressing the wound, we just play better at basketball, or we build compensate, and then people applaud that, and then okay, cool, I'm going to keep on inflating energy into that, and then that wound is still oozing.
Yep.
And so you are a fraction of yourself or festering.
Yep. That's it, man. It's exploring all those like dark corners and like at least going in enough that you can clean it out. Now, you don't need to be overindulgent in any of these things. It's not what we're talking about. It's not like, all right, sodomy palooza, here we come. Like that's not what we're saying, but we're saying that if there's these unilluminated parts, like shine a light on that. The repression and the shame is going to be worse than just like shining a light, talking about it. If you have dark thoughts, if you have, dark fantasies, if you have different things, like talk about it.
Yeah, let it breathe.
Let it breathe. Like, find somebody you trust or a professional or whoever you want, whoever you feel can create the safe container.
Write it.
Yeah, write it out. Like whatever you need to do, like allow that to process. And that's something that I've really seen with the mastermind, the Fit for Service mastermind that I've been leading for this past year is just encouraging people to share what they've deemed the unforgivable about themselves. And like some shocking things have come out, and like just the group held a space and a container of love for people to say these things that, society would say are the unforgivables. And a lot of people have a lot of things that we hold against ourselves, but there's some big things out there that people are holding on to. So whether your things are big or small, either way, like finding a group or finding a container where you can just share that and like take the backpack of that shame and all of that pressure off.
Yeah.
By expressing it. And that's going to actually help prevent you from acting on it in some weird, kind of weird way.
Yeah, it seems like a relevant thing might be to intentionally put yourself in various different games or containers that play by different rules, in case there might be some part of you that's starting to kind of kick its way out and like, oh, I'm feeling this way, but the container that I'm in doesn't accept that. And so my only option is to stuff it back in because I don't want to be shunned by the tribe. There's like be an extra quotation. I think it's Walt Whitman. He says, I am large, I contain multitudes. So we're within this one little section of what we consider to be our somebodyness, ourself. And if anything goes outside of that, it's like it starts to feel kind of like dangerous. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Put yourself, don't shelter yourself from the uncomfortable.
Yeah.
You know, like if you're super, and I can talk to myself in this way. I'm coaching myself here, right? Like if you're someone like me who've had years of judging myself based on my sexual performance, like put myself in like what would be a situation, like put myself in situations where I'm not going to be able to perform, like I'm not going to be able to get hard, but just go for it anyways, and just like surrender to that experience and love myself anyways. So that, you know, it'll happen naturally, of course. So there'll be like a natural opportunity for that. But knowing that and then getting excited about like, okay, yeah, the next time things don't go as, you know, ultimately I would want them to go, like that's a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity to practice loving myself no matter what, and like not being stressed about it, you know, regardless of what happens. You know, if it's a lover that it's new and she's like, peace, I'm out, you suck. Like, okay, like love myself anyways. You know, like all of these things are opportunities. Putting yourself in these situations, they're opportunities to repattern something that happened. Because I remember I couldn't, you know, like didn't have like a bad night with this girl in Australia that I was hooking up with when I was in college. Well, I didn't end up hooking up with her. It didn't really work that well. I was so mad at myself that I stayed up all night writing self-hate letters in a journal about how much I hated myself. What the fuck? Like that goes deep, right? Like,
What do the letters say?
The worst things possible. Like, you piece of shit. You don't deserve to live. You fucking, you're like, you're not a man. You blah, blah, blah. Like, why? What? Like, what the fuck?
Wow.
It went like really, really deep. So that's like a deeply ingrained pattern that I had. So releasing that and like being like, oh, okay, this is what it is. It's all good. Like that situation, you know, is a great opportunity for me. And I've like started to recognize that and started to like take so much of the pressure off. And then as I've been doing that, obviously my sex life has improved dramatically. And actually the more pressure you take off, the better your performance gets anyway. So it's like, it starts to work in your favor. But I could see it in other people who didn't have these issues. Like I have a really good friend who like went to go hook up with a girl and I know, and like didn't work, came back downstairs, was like laughing and like not even fucking phased at all. And I was like, whoa, you're like a superhuman.
Found your guru.
Yeah, right? Yeah, it's like
my ED guru.
Yeah, exactly. Like he went up, he like tried, didn't work, came back down, was like laughing and joking, like nothing fucking happened. I was like, wow.
Another thing that you have a tremendous amount of experience with that few people perhaps will even reach in their lives is there's a book that I haven't read, but I like the idea of it. That it's on the list called the Second Mountain. Familiar with this one? Mm-hmm. So the idea is, you know, we spend our lives climbing up this first mountain, which is like, you know, whatever your concept of success is, you know, so career or whatever it may be, typically career, financial, getting to the top of that mountain, realizing that that's not it. You haven't arrived anywhere. This is, you know, you still feel the exact same way. Maybe that's good, you know, whatever you feel, but you don't feel that much different. And then that allows the opening to transition into the journey onto the next mountain of deeper meaning. Mm-hmm. And it feels like that's kind of like a place that I think you've been there longer than you probably even would care to admit. I think you've probably like well summited the first mountain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, and it's, I think that's true. It's, I've kept the second mountain in sight. You know, I've been fortunate enough to know about the second mountain ever since my vision quest, when I went and did psilocybin 20 years ago in the mountains, and like got a glimpse of what the other mountain was, which was an expression of being where I felt my body melt away and nothing else mattered but my consciousness, you know, and like that's who I really was. So I've at least had that in view. I think a lot of people in the second mountain concept are like work, and then they have this just dramatic dissatisfaction, and then it leads them into a path of seeking. I've been kind of climbing both, but I haven't been able to let the first mountain go, you know, but I've fortunately at least had some skill in climbing the other one. But yeah, letting go of that letting go of that first mountain to really focus on the next one. I mean, I think that's going to be a big part of my life coming up. And it doesn't mean not doing it. It's about your attachment to it.
Yeah.
You know, it's not about what you do. It's about how and why you're doing it. And I think I can keep summiting different mountains and writing books and doing all these different things, but the how and why is going to be different than it was before.
Is there any advice you would give to people at base camp of the first mountain? If you were looking down, you had like a walkie-talkie, and they're like, "It looks snowy."
Base camp of the first mountain. Yeah. It's an interesting time, man. It's like a really interesting time. I think school is nonsense for the most part, unless you're doing something specific. Like I know you trained to be a rolfer. It's a very specific skill set.
Yeah.
And it's very actually effective. It's good that you had that as a baseline that
Yep.
you can like, and then you've added your own shit on top of that. So I think there's specific instances where like, oh, I want to learn how to do this. Or like, I want to learn how to apply fake eyelashes. All right, well, you should probably fucking go to school and figure that out. Don't just start hacking around on people's, eyes or whatever. But as far as like general school,
Yeah.
fuck it. Like, I think that's just wasting 4 years of time for the most part. You know, it'll maybe teach you to do things you don't want to do, but it's designed for a whole different world. It's designed for a world where you just follow orders and just listen to assignments. It's designed to make factory workers, but it's not, the school system is not designed to actually help human beings discover what they really want to offer the world. So I'd say number one is like, don't stress about school, and if you're out of school and like you don't have it figured out, the answer isn't more school. Like I know so many people who are like, they got their degree and they're like, I still don't know what to do. Well, I could go get my master's, or I could go to this fucking school. And then the problem is that that's sometimes what parents will be like, because parents like when the kid's doing something because they can tell all their fucking friends like, oh, well, my daughter or son's going to fucking Harvard fucking med or whatever, like some shit, like then it makes them feel good. Everybody's like, oh, good job. You did a good job, Bill. They're over at Harvard med. Meanwhile, it doesn't matter if they're actually fucking happy or living any good life. It's like,
or several $100,000 in debt.
Yeah, whatever. It doesn't matter. So like the problem is like parents are still like really encouraging school because that's like, they're proud of that in their kids, So that's what Robert Greene would call counter forces. So being mindful of that and knowing that for the most part, school is just going to be could be really fun. Like if you want to just kind of like meet people and party and practice your binge drinking and like explore a few things. Like, I mean, I'd studied philosophy. I did some theater. I'm happy I went, but it didn't help me at all in my career, And so I think number one, forget about that. Number two, really try to focus on what you're offering, like how you can be of benefit to people. Now that could be of benefit within a corporation, like within a corporate structure. Sure. Or it could be finding a way to directly be of benefit, because now we have the ability through our social media channels, through Reach, through podcasts, whatever, to actually put ideas out and then offer services that are unique. So find things that you're passionate about and see if there's an intersection between those. What also Robert Greene calls the Da Vinci effect, like his ability to harness like the multiplicity of knowledge of like mechanics and drawing and painting and all these things.
Which won't show itself until 10 years or
Right.
whatever time you're like, oh, connections.
Yeah, exactly.
Ah.
Exactly. So yeah, so go deep into different fields of study and different things, go deep, and then eventually find those intersections. And that's where you're going to have like the real magic, like combining breath work and movement, combining whatever, all these different, it could be any variety of different things or different coaching methodologies or different things. That's, I think that's a really virtuous way to kind of look at what to do, is just go deep in certain topics and then try to find the intersection. And that's where you're going to probably be able to offer something unique and of benefit to the world.
That's great.
Yeah.
I had a whole other side of you light up, and I'm like so excited about your fit for service. That's like open for people. I'm not trying to pitch it right now. It's interesting to see Aubrey go into like teaching people to be fit for service. I was like, oh shit.
Yeah. It's good. I think it's so many people now are like independent entrepreneurs, right? Like really that's becoming something that, because people, like the classic definition of an entrepreneur, you're starting a company, you're going to have employees, and then you're eventually going to like be able to remove yourself from that company, and the company is going to exist. You're like birthing something, and that's one way to do it. But a much easier, lower overhead way to go about it is to be like an independent freelancer, like an independent entrepreneur, where you're just offering services or skills or something of benefit. And I think you'll learn a ton from that. And I think that's a path that a lot of people are going to take, and a lot of people are currently taking, is to be able to really like offer their unique thing rather than being the product of, Verizon or AT&T trying to fucking hawk phones and whatever. That's fine if you need to do that. Like, I understand we all need money, and if you're doing that, just take your spare time and find something else that you're passionate about, and try to go deep. Don't just touch a bunch of things lightly. Find that thing that's really interesting and try to really go deep in it.
I love it, man.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I appreciate you making time for this.
Of course.
Where do people go from here? What's the
I don't know. You can listen to my
Your
podcast.
book? Yeah, the podcast.
Yeah. Aubrey Marcus podcast. Instagram at Aubrey Marcus. YouTube. I got all the things.
Yeah. Is the fit for service something you care to like? Is that like is that open to people to try?
Yeah. So
how's that go?
Yeah, applications. So you have to apply to that, and we do it based on like a trimester program. So it's like a 4-month at minimum. And you can stack as many of those 4 months as you want, but each one will have like a different theme. So, the next one coming up for the start of 2020 is going to be the first part of the hero's journey, which is really about the first mountain. So like what we talked about with the first mountain, like how to get yourself to a place where you can summit the first mountain. That's kind of the first part of the hero's journey, getting so enthusiastic about something and knowing that you're able to like navigate the ego and figure that out. Second trimester is going to be more about going into the shadows. And again, we actually talked about a lot of this stuff, but I think it's universally applicable. Finding where you have the fears and repressions and shames and guilts and the unforgivables, the grievances you hold against yourself, and pouring light and pouring forgiveness and pouring like love into those areas. And then the third part is going to be about how do you bring that back to your community? How do you bring that back to the people you love? So, and you can do them all. You can, dive in and do one of those different units. But the beautiful thing is just an awesome community of people that just, we've all grown to just really love each other over the course of the year. And we brought in like a bunch of rad people, like out in Malibu, there was InQ and Paul Selig and East Forest and a bunch of other people for all these summits. Just trying to weave in the right combination of the wizards that we know.
That's great.
Yeah, man. It's pretty fucking special.
Well, I so greatly appreciate your willingness to share yourself authentically in any situation, even when it's like not the prettiest.
Yeah, no, for sure not. For sure not.
I think it's great, man. I really appreciate it.
Like if the wand comes out of your butt and it's got poop on it,
Oh, boy.
It's got poop on it,
It's got poop.
It's just got poop. Like that's what it is.
That's the way it is.
It's just the way it is.
I love the poop.
That's where sometimes there's poop in there.
Yep. That's just the nature of things.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's stop the podcast there.
Don't be afraid of poop, everybody. Embrace your poop.
All right. Thanks so much, man. I appreciate having you on. I love you.
Love you too, brother.
Thank you, dude.
Yeah.
Good times.
Yeah, man.
All right. Over and out. Pow.